Great,
Okay,
thank you.
you're welcome.
It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Katherine Skinner. Dr. Skinner is the Director of Programs at Invest in Open Infrastructure, a not-for-profit organization that works to increase investment in and adoption of open infrastructures that support the research enterprise. At IOI, she shepherds a robust slate of research, strategic support, and coordination work, including grant-funded research projects, client-based engagements, and multi-sector collaborative efforts. Prior to her work at IOI, Catherine co-founded and directed a nonprofit organization, the Educopia Institute, for more than 15 years, providing scaffolding training and systems that support collaborative community efforts like the Library Publishing Coalition, Meta Archive Cooperative, Software Preservation Network, and many others. Catherine will be talking to us today about a recent landscape analysis conducted by IOI on the needs and dependencies within the research software ecosystem, with a special focus on the supporting infrastructure that undergirds it. That's to say, us. So, without further ado, Catherine, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for having me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and post a link to the slides and also a link to the report. This is a really well-timed event because we did just release the main report for this project on Tuesday of this week. So thrilled to be here with you guys. This is going to be an incredibly brief presentation. And actually, let me start a timer so that I keep it brief. That will give you a little bit of a taste of what we've been doing around a landscape analysis on the needs and dependencies in research software. We've been looking at the ecosystem since about September 2024 as part of this Sloan grant. We, of course, have been familiar with the ecosystem prior to that. The report again was just published on Tuesday, and this will be a very brief review of what we found and what recommendations we have. And I am available and happy to talk more about any of this. This has been my all-consuming passion for the last couple of months. So the project aims, the way that we structured this project was three-part. It's a very small project. It was just a 5-month engagement, Sloan funded. What we were asked to do is advance the understanding of the landscape. We needed to offer field level recommendations, and we were to facilitate some conversation and engagement. So we undertook the research from a place of what I'd call partial neutrality. So we don't have a stake in research software ourselves at Invest in Open Infrastructure. We've worked adjacent to it. Some of the folks within our staff have worked more deeply, but nobody has been actually engaged in research software, would call themselves a research software engineer, or have run infrastructure in this space. And I think that's important to note. So what we were asked to do is really try to bring that external view, and to use both desk research and a series of interviews to identify some of the spaces where services and initiatives in this field might be able to better connect, also to identify where there might be overcrowding, and to really start to probe at what indicates good value for the different services that are emerging. So we approached representatives from 23 different organizations, and we wound up speaking with 19 organizations and about 25 people over the subsequent months. And their perspectives have been absolutely key to this study. And many people that you all know very well were part of that. There is a list of the interviewees that is almost all of the interviewees at the end of the report, if you're curious. We acknowledge that this is a necessarily and intentionally limited report, limited study. But we think that we've got some pretty interesting findings nonetheless. So based on our desk research and our interviews, research software, I would say, has been emerging and actively evolving as a field for about 2 decades, maybe 2.5 decades, depending on how you want to slice and dice it. I'm using the sociological construct of fields in both the paper and in what I'm saying today. Bourdieuian, there are lots of sociological studies that have used that kind of frame. The reason that I use it, and I'm a sociologist by training, so some of it is that it's a tool it's a lens that I am well familiar with. But it's also because there are these life cycles that happen with not just individual organizations, but also with industries and with fields. And so, what I mean when I say a field is really a set of players that are all working towards a common set of goals. and who are supporting real work in usually very institutionalized ways. So, what I'm using that for in this report is to try to understand where research software and research software infrastructure are in terms of the field development, and then use that to really think about what kinds of techniques and investments and activities might best boost what's already happening well within research software. So what we have highlighted in the report is a lot of the patterns of interaction that are happening between players, how those players are negotiating for visibility and meaning, and ultimately structural predictability within this, again, emerging field. And people are also navigating and kind of negotiating for what their own positions are going to be within this field as it continues to grow. And so I would say that research software is fairly typical of what we've seen in other spaces in institutionalization. There's nothing, magically different here. It's still navigating its evolution. It's not formalized yet. It's still dominated by disciplinary and geographical pockets of activity, many of which are overlapping and have some competing missions, goals, and funding options. And so that kind of center point of the field or the formation of the field is still very much underway. Now, in a normal fiscal, normal, in a stable political and fiscal environment, we could expect to see the meta layer that's bridging now all of these players, because you all know, I mean, you're on this call, right? This is starting to come together across those disciplinary and geographical pockets of activity. Um, that meta layer would continue to develop in normal times, and the set of social and technical infrastructure elements that serve the area would continue to narrow in number and focus. Synergies would be found, gaps would be filled, duplication would be eliminated, and the field of practice would really settle into a more formalized rhythm, much as what we are seeing now, maybe with things like research data, which maybe is at one stage more maturity. But we're not in a stable political and financial environment. And the field is in a fraught liminal space between field emergence and field formalization. And so, what we're recommending, and a lot of what you'll hear from me in the next few minutes, but also what you'll read in the report, is encouragement towards championing the things that already exist, that are starting to build across initiatives, and to increase the collaborative planning and action as much as possible. It's not a moment that I would recommend a lot of new things be funded with the limited funding that is available. I think we got to double down and we got to make some hard choices, and that the research software infrastructure space really needs that concentration. Now, that of course is easier said than done. But I want to give you just a quick view. I'm not going to go through these next two slides. But what we did is looked from the interviews and from the desk research, tried to look at a couple of common markers of uh, emergent fields and kind of how you judge where things are on a life cycle. It's not a binary. It's not that like hidden is good, is bad, and visible is good. It just helps you understand where in the maturation process things are. And so, unsurprisingly, probably to most of you, there's still a lot of activity that is more on the hidden scale, although it's starting to become more visible. We also found that things are still very fragmented, that right now the coherence of the activities that are going on is not very high. And we found that there's a lot of fragility. And that's really where I'm focused today and generally in my work, and probably will be for the next foreseeable future, because this is not going to go away anytime soon. The level of defunding and global defunding, not just the situation, but of course my accent tells you I'm going to be US biased to some degree, and so I really feel it right now. But this has been happening all over the world, and is happening in different ways in different regions. But the defunding and lack of support that we can expect for open science more generally, but especially for research software, I think is something that we've got to be motivated by. So, in terms of recommendations, there are four recommendations we made. Let me check my time. Yeah, we're good. So, four recommendations we've made. The first is to surface hidden information. Um, again, you all know this. I'm actually speaking more to the choir right now. But there is a paucity of available, standardized, and meaningful data about research software. So that's the data both about the kind of funding, so who funds what actors to do what activities with how much funding. It's about production, so who's creating what tools and objects, and what do those do, and where can they be found, and with what licensing. And then use and reuse, what's being used, by whom, and how much, and then also about engagement. Where are people actually coming together, and how visible is that? How easy is that to actually see and assess and build on? So maturation and formalization of the field depends in part on what kind of data is captured and how it's used to assess the field's development, its players, its resources, and its products and services, so that you're building in a way that is actually reinforced by the data that says that this building is moving in the right direction. So that's our first piece. There's a lot more in the report. The second piece, second recommendation that IOI is making is strengthen the scaffolding. So as you all know, there are all kinds of pieces of scaffolding that undergird the research and scientific processes. And really, when you look at the beginning of any field, you see lots and lots and lots of little experiments that are going on all over the place. And pieces of that start to take root. And then other pieces don't take root, but because they're volunteer efforts and they're funded on a nickel and dime or your equivalent, um, they stick around and they take up space. And so, one of the things that is really dangerous, I think, right now for this particular ecosystem or field or emerging space is that there are so many social and technical, not quite infrastructures that have popped up. Again, some of them with overlapping missions and overlapping goals. And that's okay, except that it is going to slow down progress for the field. So, too many experiments that are propped up with small amounts of funding and that falter or fail after a slow period, that's not what we want. What we want is for funding and attention to be reinforced or reinforcing a common set of social and technical infrastructures. That means choosing a few players that get to go farther faster. And that's a hard thing to do. And I could talk for hours about that, but not today. Third one is grow the market. So we have this assumption, and I've seen it certainly in research software, but I've seen it across the board in everything that I've done in my career. There is an assumption that if I'm producing something that is of value, there's a market that is going to be there. It's just going to, I need to figure out how to tap into it. Not true. We have to build the market. So part of what is really complicated for those of us who are in these kind of academic and often nonprofit spaces is that some of the things that you have to do in order to really construct that market, and I don't mean market for profit, but just the series of exchanges that are necessary to keep things afloat, those are not things that we are good at historically, or that is borne out by the way that we're forming these things right now. What we need is understanding of things like, okay, I may understand my users, I have a user base, but my users don't have any dollars. My users are embedded in an institution where there are dollars. Where is procurement in this picture, and how do I appeal to procurement? Stepping back from just building the infrastructures and being able to ask those questions is something that we think is really important right now. And then finally, invest in coordination. So things like what you're doing right here, and treat this moment like the emergency that it is. So I think streamlining is essential for success anyway, and that things will move better for the field if it streamlines. But I think right now the funding risks ahead mean that we're going to lose a lot of ground. It's not just that we're going to stagnate; it's that we will actually lose a lot of ground if we don't make those coordinated efforts a real focus of our attention. That is it. I almost stuck exactly to 10. I'm sorry. I went a little bit over, Alan.
That was great. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Absolutely.
Um, So, do people have any questions? I thought this was a fantastic and timely report. Um, Also coming from a background of thinking about institutions and institutional change, it's I think it's a much needed one. That this perspective is so valuable. Um, are there any questions to start with from the
Well,
audience?
I
Thomas?
don't have a question, but I would like to say a word of praise. As I was examining the outputs of your project while you were presenting, I stumbled on this landscape overview, and I love how complete it seems. And my team was exactly looking for this. So thanks.
Excellent. I will let Emmy know that that you are excited to see this. It is
It
not
is.
perfect. Again, like with all of this
Mhm,
project, one of the real frustrations is we've only got so much time and so much available energy to put towards it, and all of us are
mhm.
really passionate about it. But I love what Emmy managed to produce here, and it is very
Yes,
much
this can really to take a, in my case, more institutional perspective. We were trying to figure out, what are all the systems, platforms that research software has to deal with. We could make a list of ourselves, and practically everything we've thought of so far is in here and more. Maybe we have some additions, but I'll return to that topic later.
excellent. Hopefully, this is something that folks can build on as well.
Yes, thanks.
Jason?
Yeah, so thanks for a great presentation. I think indeed most of the things you mentioned we also notice in practice. And that's also where my question comes from. So do you also have maybe success stories of infrastructures that successfully managed to, well, it's become sustainable, right? So have enough funding to keep on going. Because I think we can also learn from that, and of course we can also learn from failures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we don't have enough evidence of either of those in published case studies.
Okay.
It's something that we're trying to fill gaps on. But the one that I'll point to right now is the preservation field, the digital preservation field,
Hmm.
which I have my roots in. I helped to found one of the first digital preservation networks that was done on the LOX software out of Stanford. And so I played in that space for a long time. And one of the things that was both maddening and also eventually changed was watching again. I mean, I've been doing these life cycle kind of modeling projects for a long time, watching how the NDIP project in particular in the US, and the amount of funding. It was the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program. I can still rattle it off. That program, millions upon millions of dollars that was put towards collaboration on digital preservation networks. And it did seed a lot of activity in the United States, including the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, eventually, which was founded out of that. One of the things that happened because of that is that everything was volunteer based in the running of that NDSA organization, and it took up space. And people had great ideas. People did some great work. I think the levels of digital preservation, which came out of that, is just a rock solid piece of work. But by God, it took up space, and we watched as the Digital Preservation Coalition was bubbling up in the UK and doing remarkable work and actually starting to build that cohesion. And that has become, I mean, it's not the only space, certainly, but that has become one of those kind of center points that doesn't try to do everything, which is great. It's the social network that helps to bridge all of the different players. So if I'm trying to teach somebody about digital preservation, I know where to point them at this point. And that's been the case probably for about 7 years, 8 years now. And watching that journey towards what I would say is some solidification and some real formalization of the field. I can see so many places where I wish we had intervened along the way to change some of the ways that different players were perceived and handled in the space, including Preservica, which now runs the market in the United States. as a for-profit, and also Libnova and some of the other groups that, again, it's not commercial versus non-commercial. Libnova's fantastic. But seeing how that constellation has come into being is a good parallel, I think, for some of the other formation activities that are happening right now in research software.
Great. Any other questions? I, Shelley, you just,
Yeah, I
uh,
sorry, I was putzing around in the kitchen while you were talking,
oh, okay.
as one does at lunchtime. When you were speaking about the loss, the potential loss
Yeah.
that we are, especially in the US, definitely going to see. What's on my mind right now are the folks working on data rescue, and for our community, Earth and Space Sciences, the climate data, the environmental data, yeah. Um, when you that for that concern against software, can you share some thoughts on what might be at risk, maybe what this SciCodes could be helping to block that or mitigate that risk?
Yeah, it's hard. Y'all are going to know more about the details of which elements are at that heaviest risk space. But what I can tell you is the ripple effects of NSF pausing its funding and then NIH pausing its funding and really not coming back out of it. Um, they're going to take down the university system in the United States. I mean, I really, as a sociologist, I expected it to happen in my lifetime. It's been bloated and large. The ripple effects globally of that are astronomical and cost us so much, whether you're looking at the health sciences or climate, or I mean all of these things that we know we have to address right now. I think one of the most important spaces to be working in right now is keeping up the relationships that exist, like SciCodes, because trust is going to break between the US and a lot of the other players, and a lot of the data and a lot of the infrastructure is in the US, whether we like it or not. And so figuring out ways to port things over to make sure that there are backups. I mean, even things like Internet Archive now has a stitch thing. Thank God. There are all kinds of things that worry me about still that source of information. But figuring out like what are those critical pieces, and can we get a backup outside of the United States that can be used, that is actually that is actualized at this point. Those kinds of things resonate with me a lot. And then throw in with the data rescue efforts. One of the things that I wish I could do right now, because we're trying to amplify where infrastructures are immediately hurt. So we can look at things like Archive, for example, where they had massive NASA funding and they had massive NSF funding, and y'all, they are way underfunded. They were a client of ours for almost 2 years. They don't get much of their funding from the community. They get most of their funding from grants, and most of it doesn't support operations of Archive. And so what just happened to an already starved infrastructure is that it just condensed more. And it's housed at Cornell, where everything at Cornell is getting condensed more. So suddenly these big pieces that we all depend on are potentially fracturing. And we want to be able to push that forward and make that visible where we can. We can't do that with the data science rescue stuff because it puts too many people at risk. So what I'll say is find them and work on them. I wish I could point more explicitly to them. Yeah.
Hervé?
Yeah, so I certainly think that SciCodes could, act as a network to facilitate that kind of rescue operation. I'm I personally wouldn't feel comfortable advocating for moving things altogether from one place to another. But in my opinion, because really, midterm, this whole risk is not limited to the US, unfortunately.
100%.
I would really advocate for geographical redundancy
Yes.
as much as possible, and that geographical redundancy could be something that we try to think about in as part of the guidelines we've been working on over the past years within SciCodes.
I
Uh,
love it.
it's makes sense to me because really this could happen anywhere.
Yeah. And will and is. I mean, looking at the Netherlands and the layoffs that are happening right now from it is not isolated to the US by any stretch.
Yeah.
I love the Byzantine model that David Rosenthal, who wrote the Locks Code, lots of copies keep stuff safe at Stanford. That was the model that he said, okay, 7 copies is where you start to hit a threshold of safety or buy enough nines in engineering speak for this to actually work. And I think that kind of thinking is something that we need desperately right now.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting sort of trade-offs between, so on the one hand, um uh you seem to argue a little bit for centralization of some kind, right? Like because we need to centralize our efforts, but
Very
being decentralized increases your resilience. And so I think I think maybe the takeaway I'm getting is we need to work on our interoperability efforts, right? Like how do we make it so that submitting a software package can be distributed seamlessly, frictionlessly across these multiple architectures and infrastructures.
Yeah, it's kind of focused redundancy. It's again, I mean,
Yeah.
it's more than just it's more than just interoperability. I think we really do have to choose some winners right now and say, here are the 7 things that we think we can actually make sure survive this tumultuous moment, and they are what we need to be building on. And
Mhm.
communities can make those decisions. And it may not be that every community makes the same decision, but starting to channel our resources and channel our attention more deliberately towards a few, and then creating redundancy and decentralization of how those are handled, I think is my recommendation for where I'd love to see things moving. Y'all have been so
Any,
much fun to talk to you. You have other things
yeah.
to do. So
Yeah,
know that
yeah. I
I
know
exist.
it's bumping up on 9:45
Yeah.
now. And I know
I
you have to take
exist,
off.
and
Yes.
I would love to talk to any of y'all at any point. Hopefully, I'll see many of you in person in April. And yeah, thank you for having me today.